Okay, so I filmed this video the other day, but I'm trying to do it again because I just came across as kind of pitiful. I don't know, it's just not really the image that I was trying to put on the internet, so I'm back. I figured for this video, because Halloween is in a week and a half and the past 3 videos that I put out were all DIY and tutorial oriented, I figured I would do a proper introduction of who I am and why I started this channel and my journey to getting to this place. Halloween is honestly, to me, one of the most therapeutic times of the year. I think a lot of people can relate to the idea of having to repress a certain aspect of your personality the rest of the year, and then Halloween is the one day where it's kind of acceptable to exaggerate it and become a caricature of the version of yourself that you're told is not socially acceptable. It's a lot of the reason why a lot of women feel compelled to wear hyper-sexualized costumes. And I think that's awesome, because if you don't do it at least once a year, you're gonna be so pent up and you're just gonna feel a lot of hatred and not a lot of acceptance towards yourself, because that's an inherent aspect to majority of people, that sexuality, the aspects of yourself that are just a little bit, you know, in this Western society that was built on Puritanism, it's kind of inherent that it's going to be a controversial topic, but it's really not. It's just your body. I want to talk about how costume has really helped me understand who I am, because I started out, you know, when I was really, really young, I would design clothes all the time. I have all these sketchbooks from when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, and I'm just, they're really cute. There's this one page where it's like what to wear to a party. And there's different types of parties, a Christmas party, Easter party, whatever, because you're like 6, and I'm like, okay, what do I celebrate? Because it's not like I'm going to like somebody's wicked house party. And it's really cool because at a really young age, it was the way, it shows how I interpreted culture. And what I love about it specifically, I'm 21 now, and those are from between 2006 and 2008. Which was like the height of the Juicy Couture tracksuit and wearing like those really exaggerated like Ralph Lauren polos with all like the stripes and like emblems on it, and like wearing low-rise jeans and skirts over your pants and the chunky wooden heels. And I remember drawing my versions of that, the versions of those clothes that I wish I had. And it's interesting that now I'm watching kids that are 14, 15 years old on TikTok or on Instagram or something, and they're doing their own versions of that, except they're doing it in like a countercultural way. And it's nice to look back at my own designs and see how my version of that while it was still in the mainstream. But then suddenly, around my adolescence, when I was 10 years old, I switched schools and I became part of this community that I wasn't used to. It was very waspy. I never knew that it was real. I saw it in movies, but I never figured I would be a part of it. I mean, to the point where there was a girl in the locker room. It was like my first day in a locker room. We were changing for gym, and this girl showed me her like rhinestone Juicy Couture boy shorts. And the first question I asked her was, how do you sit? Because I figured it would just like poke her ass, and she was so offended. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, like this is so new to me. Like, I've never been to a country club. I know, who would have thought that that would be the thing that you're trying to fit into. I wasn't raised to be a part of that scene. My parents were artists, and I was always like a little bit aloof, and I think it was really easy to use against me. And I was suddenly thrown in a place where I was very aware of the nuances in the culture, and everything you did could be held against you. And I was suddenly super insecure about everything that I thought I knew. All of my opinions toward how to express myself have been compromised. I became hyper aware of specific girls in my grade that were getting the kind of attention that I really wanted. They represented to me a quirkiness defended by beauty. And I knew that I was always like a little bit quirky, but I didn't feel like I had the beauty or the grace to back it up. Because if you're just kind of flopping around and you're not cute, it just looks messy. And I just figured that if I copied aspects of those girls that I really was envious of, then I could have a little bit of that. And I remember that being the first moment where I think I was using a version of costume as a form of self-protection in a way. Like, I knew if I wanted to get through middle school, I had to adapt, and my method of doing that was just emulating the girls that I was envious of. Like, if they were wearing a certain kind of legging, then I would get those leggings, or I would wear suspenders. And it was like during that time where wearing mustaches on your finger was cool, so I would do that. And I got a Tumblr, and I was obsessed with like Zooey Deschanel. I tried so hard to make that me, but it just wasn't. And so I came across as really desperate and insecure. But in a way, like, wearing their identity was my first time using costume as a form of self-preservation in a cultural context that I had no place in, really. And then I get to high school, and suddenly I'm so pissed because everything that I was working towards in middle school, all that identity that I was trying to have, just wasn't working. It was backfiring, and no one was buying it. And so I become the antithesis of that. I cut off all my hair, I dyed it, I got a green mohawk, I got a nose ring, I was wearing chains, I stretched one of my ears, my parents got incredibly angry at me, I did RISD pre-college, and I started going to the city every weekend, and suddenly I found myself compensating for the lack of attention I was getting when I was covered in acne and I had long hair and it was greasy and I had wireframe glasses. Basically, I was compensating for middle school. It really was not healthy. It wasn't myself. I wasn't being myself. I was too scared to be myself still because I knew that it still wasn't attractive. But I figured if I was, a caricature of this super kind of punk, I don't care about anything, hypersexualized and all leather and denim, then that was also going to protect me as well. And so I adopted that character, and because I knew that I was never going to be the standard of beauty in that culture that I was in all through middle school and high school, I decided that I was going to become the antithesis of that. And that was going to be my identity and my costume for the next couple years. I'm kind of glazing over this because I think a lot of people can relate to like wanting to be incredibly alternative in high school. I think I took it to a more extreme level than most kids would, but I needed that to protect myself. And then I went to college and I went to art school, and suddenly I became the standard of beauty. I was the manic pixie dream girl, and I was crazy and I was doing anything I wanted all the time, and I was so confused as to why none of my relationships were working out. And it took me a really long time to understand, even though I'm looking back on it and it's like, it seems so obvious to me that, of course, no one is going to like you, and you're not going to find a healthy relationship, and you're not going to find a boyfriend who loves you if you can't love yourself, and if you're not being honest with who you are. And to this point, I never had to be honest to myself about who I was because I was so insecure about who I was that I never even wanted to explore it. I was always using some form of costume to cover up my insecurities, to adopt an identity that was going to help me navigate an environment that I thought that I couldn't protect myself against by just being myself. Suddenly, by the end of freshman year, I was left entirely alone because I was wearing a costume the entire time, and I adopted this alter ego to the point where I thought that I was that. And when it was failing me, I felt like I was failing myself. My boyfriend cheated on me, left me, kept breaking up with me like 50 times. I had all these really surface level friends. I had a couple that I still have to this day, and thank God for them because I don't know if I'd have made it alone. There was a lot of stories about me that I was hearing that were like, of course people would be talking about me in that way because that was what I was projecting, but I would hear it like a mirror, like I was having it being projected back at me. And for the first time I realized, I was like, that's not me. That's not how I want people to interpret me. I'm an artist. I want to be a professional. I want to have a career. I don't want to be a slut anymore. I don't want to hear all these versions of myself that feel so disconnected from what I anticipate for my future. And I was confronted with a dilemma, and that was, how am I going to figure out who I am when everybody is telling me some version of myself that feels so disconnected? At the school that I went to, foundations year is your freshman year, and then sophomore year you choose your major and you go into it. And I really kind of glazed over foundations year. I just spent all my time really focusing on my social life and trying to become someone socially, because I think I was compensating for how much of a loser I was in middle school and high school. I didn't have a friend group or anything, and suddenly I was thrust into this environment where, just being kind of outlandish and inviting people over and supplying alcohol could get you a lot of friends. So that's what I did, and I survived off of that for a year, and then I felt incredibly empty. And as a sophomore, I was like, okay, I'm in my major now, and I'm going to take advantage of the tools that I'm given, the classes that, I'm learning these skills that I've been anticipating my entire life, and I'm not going to fuck around anymore, because I did that freshman year and it just backfired more than I could have imagined. I think the breaking point for me was in the beginning of sophomore year. I got into this very, very quick relationship that ended, like, it was like 2 weeks. It, like, I doubt he even remembers me, but it was just like, I was so confronted with the fact that I was a mess. I was using all of these unhealthy coping mechanisms. I couldn't get someone to like me. It was the first time where I was like, well, there's this artsy guy and I'm just being the archetype of like the manic pixie dream girl. Why doesn't he like me? Why is he freaking out every time I talk? It was because I wasn't being honest. I was being like manic all the time and trying to start fights. And I was like, well, this is supposed to be passionate and exciting. Why isn't it working? And I told myself after that I was just going to be celibate for 6 months. I just wasn't going to go on any dates. I wasn't going to even flirt with guys at parties. I was just going to focus on me and trying to figure out who I was and trying to nurture my friendships that I realized, you know, after all that drama freshman year, I learned who my real friends were. And I was like, I'm going to nurture these friendships. And for the next 6 months, that's what I did. And for my first semester sophomore final, it was the first time that I made a costume because I was hearing all of these rumors about who I supposedly was. And I realized that never in my life have I ever made a strong statement for what I believed in and who I was. I still wasn't really confident in my voice. I always say art is a little bit like a mask, you know? You never have to make a statement about what your piece concretely means. To me, it's so much safer to create a piece of art to hide behind when you're trying to make a statement, because it can very hardly be used against you. So I decided that this alter ego, this costume that I was going to create, was going to be my statement. You know, that statement was, if I'm going to be othered, it has to be by my own terms. It was a full body suit. I sewed it completely by hand. I don't even remember how long it took me. I just remember sitting in the cafeteria and appliquing the stars onto the pants because I couldn't, like, there was not a time during the day where I couldn't be working. I was literally like on a Friday night inviting my friends to come hang out at my apartment, and everyone would be like drinking and dancing, and I would literally be sitting on the couch and sewing this suit. And it was like, for a week and a half, it took over everything in my life. And it was like, every time that I had it in my hands, I had to contemplate, what does this mean to me? Who am I? What am I trying to become? And what am I trying to say through this garment? And it was like one of the most therapeutic things I had ever done. And that sense of fulfillment when I finished the night before my critique, it was like 4 a.m. I walked out of the studio and I felt so alive. You know, I had been sitting on this for like the past 20 hours, and yet I felt so fulfilled because for the first time I had evidence of my self-worth. I took these skills. I taught myself how to make clothes. I haven't had any formal education in it. And it was this thing where I was like, conceptually and physically, it was an entity that was a complete reflection of myself. And I felt in that moment like nobody could tell me otherwise. To essentially be a circus performer and putting myself on display for everyone to judge by my own terms. Because I don't care what people say about me as long as it's an opinion based on who I genuinely am. And to this point, I felt like every one of these stories that I was hearing, or any one of these critiques of my character I was hearing, was based off a version of myself that didn't exist, or existed but was a facade. This practice can be like adapted to many different mediums and many different modes of self-expression, but this was just the path that I took because it felt the most natural to me. And then later on, after I did this piece, I still felt, okay, I made this statement to the public. Now I need to make a statement for myself, to myself, for no one else. I need to understand who I am now that I'm not as angry anymore. I need to break down my character to try to understand it. And that's when I conceived my alter ego series. That's what I call it. And I didn't hand this in for a grade. I was just making it for myself. It was really frantic in a way, the way that it was produced, because I was so manic in that period, because I was like, I felt scared. I was like, I don't know who I am. How am I going to finish school and make work that's honest if I don't know who I am? You know, these were unconscious thoughts while creating these costumes. While I was creating them, I just had these designs. I had these materials that, you know, were leftovers from prior pieces. And I was like, okay, what can I do with this? You know, it wasn't until I was doing the photo shoots for them, when I put on the suits and I became that character, that I really understood what each of these characters represented to me. And what happened was that I ended up breaking apart my identity into 4 caricatures. And these 4 suits became one of the most important series of works that I made. after that, I put it aside. I don't even think that I really put on any of these garments since. And that's the thing. It's like, I made these costumes because in the moment, it was a reflection of how I felt in that moment, of who I was in that moment, and what I needed to understand about myself. And once I became the character, I took the photos, I had a very well-rounded portfolio showing each of these honest versions of myself. I was content. I didn't need to go back to it. Me telling this story, I guess it's not really that important. It's not like a life or death situation. I mean, maybe for me it was. Maybe this was the thing that saved me from going insane. But, you know, in the context of Halloween and in the context of just like in quarantine where you have to just sit with yourself all the time and try to understand who you are, why do you feel compelled to dress like this? What does this mean? What are you crying for help for? I don't think that should be considered a frivolous part of our culture. I think fashion and the way that we adorn ourselves and the way that we express ourselves through what we put on our bodies is so important because it's a reflection of what we find important socially and individually. And that should never be taken for granted. Also, making clothes for yourself creates a relationship with your body that you don't get when you're buying clothes at a store. When you're buying clothes at a store, they're putting so many labels on you, whether you're conscious of it or not. They're telling you your size, what fit looks good on your body, what materials you're supposed to be wearing, what colors, everything. But when you're making clothes for yourself, you are the tool and the audience. And not only do you get to wear something that you created and is custom made for you and a reflection of what you want, it's also evidence of your own abilities. And you should always be grateful for your body and for your hands and what it can create. So much of my self-worth before I started making costumes or sculpture or drawing really that often was dependent on what other people were placing onto me. It wasn't until I had physical evidence of my abilities where I really felt a sense of self-worth that nobody could make me feel any different about. I'm making this video because I know that clothing is something that everyone can relate to. Everybody expresses themselves physically in some way to the people around them. And that is so amazing. There's nothing that we can do that's original, and everything we do has an impact on the world around us. How and with what we choose to clothe ourselves should never be taken for granted. And I guess I'm done with my story. I don't really know if that was really linear or made an impact on anyone watching, but I just wanted to finish this story by expressing what tweenhood actually means. Some people were asking me why, you know? And tweenhood is actually a moniker that came out while just joking with my best friend. And I was just like reminiscing on like One Direction or something. And I was like, yeah, back in my tweenhood. And it was so funny that I made it my Instagram handle. And from then I just couldn't let go of it. And at this point, it's kind of morphed into a moniker that reflects my kind of want to go back in time and relive my tweenhood and my adolescence in a more constructive way, in a way that's more honest to myself and didn't depend on what other people thought of me. And I guess making this channel, it's the first time in my life where I feel confident enough to even express this stuff on the internet. You know, ever since I had any social media, I was really curating the posts that I was putting up. When I wrote any captions, it would be kind of like cryptic and poetic because I was just too scared to be honest with my own voice. And in a way, I don't really go back to costume as much anymore because costume was my way of telling these stories without actually having to use my voice. Now that I'm more confident in my own voice, I don't want to disregard that. I want to use it, and YouTube is my outlet to do that. And I don't know whether this is going to go anywhere, but I know this is important because this is the kind of message that when I was little, I wish somebody had told me. So I'm hoping that if there's any tweens or, you know, even kids my age, if anyone is watching this, I really hope that this gave someone a little bit of confidence or maybe even some motivation to go use a creative outlet as a means of self-preservation and therapy, because it really, really helps. It's the basis of our culture. It's the basis of every culture. It's the basis of human spirit, and it should never be overlooked. So with that, thank you for watching. Subscribe for more costume-related content, maybe more stories like this. I don't know if I'm gonna talk about this stuff more, but I just knew that I needed to make an introduction to who I am for this channel to feel like it has a proper foundation for me. So peace out. I'll see you next Friday, and I'll probably be making my Halloween costume because I haven't made one yet. I've been making costumes for other people, but not for myself. So peace out. See you then.